Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Sustainable Tallahassee's Green Drinks. I'm Mike Mitchell, president of Sustainable Tallahassee and your host for this evening. We are going to be joined momentarily by Alan Niedoroda, president of the Friends of Lake Jackson. Founded in 1998, the Friends of Lake Jackson is a group of concerned citizens who work to preserve and protect Lake Jackson, a 4,000-acre natural water body that occupies a closed watershed of 43 square miles. Before we do that, though, I just want to take this opportunity to again remind everyone Sustainable Tallahassee is a independent 501c3 nonprofit that exists entirely on your donations and your contributions. As we enter the final quarter here of 2020, your donations can help us now more than ever. With Giving Tuesday coming up here, the first day, actually, I believe, in December. As with last year, we will be matching every donation. And forgot my script. Anyway, let's go ahead and bring Alan in. Alan, save me from my poor hosting tonight.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to do something similar to that here too, because the Friends of Lake Jackson is also a volunteer group that depends upon the contributions of its members, the dues of its members. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So now I have to admit, Mike and I have been struggling a little bit with getting this PowerPoint together. We're sharing it with everybody who's watching, which is the good news. The bad news is that I can't seem to control it. Going from the first slide to the second slide. And I'm not sure what to do.
Your mouse there should be in the PowerPoint window, and then you can control it. Try now.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't look like a mouse anymore. It's got a different type of symbol there, and so I'm wondering, Mike, is there any way you might control it?
No, there is not. So if you go up there to the top and you fully maximize PowerPoint, maximize the window to full screen. Double click on PowerPoint.
This is acting as though my entire computer is frozen. Well, so I can't get to the icon to expand it because that's off the right-hand corner. And I can't drag anything. Wait a minute, can I drag any? Nope, can't drag anything. Here we go.
That looks like it works.
Okay, here we go. All right. And this is unfortunate because we're not for this COVID presentation. We would hear applause right now. We've solved the problem. Okay, so all right, here we go. Friends of Lake Jackson is, as Mike indicated, is a volunteer group established in 1998. And we thought it might be an interesting thing to tell you about because you're interested in sustainable Tallahassee and sustainable areas, and we're interested specifically in sustaining and improving the lake as one of our major goals. We have a meeting every month and an annual event. We're really active in interacting with county, state, and city level agencies and in many cases our political leaders to keep Lake Jackson in the public eye and to undertake a number of projects to preserve the lake, which I'll be talking about here. We're also known for sort of a non-conformal approach because what we try to do is to follow developments throughout the watershed, especially those that might impact stormwater and the water quality or other issues related to the lake, and then be an advocacy group for the benefit of the lake with the various agencies that are involved in permitting the developments to go on. And at the bottom here, you see our website, thefriendsoflakejackson.org. Now, if you go to that website, you'll see a number of very interesting videos. This is one of the things from that website, and you can see an eagle released there by the St. Francis Restoration Group. And there are eagle populations on the lake. around the lake. On the bottom right is the Lumpkin, or so. Lake Jackson is a really a very, very nice natural environment that is worthy of preserving. It's got a wide variety of different types of bird life, and as you can see in the upper right, some reptilian life as well. It's also the major recreational water body for Leon County, with all kinds of water skiing and fishing and duck hunting and even the occasional parasail. So it's an important asset to the community in these various ways. The Friends of Lake Jackson had a Tim Lynch, who's a retired professor from FSU in economics, to help us by taking a study that had been done in 1993 to estimate what the economic impact of Lake Jackson is on the local economy. And back in 1993, the analysis turned out as $10 million a year. And if you up that to a 2015 time frame, which is when that study was done, that increases to show that Lake Jackson and the recreation associated with it, the fishing, the outboard motor repair, the gasoline, all of that adds up to a economic benefit of $26 million each year, provided the lake is used to the same high level that we've been able to use in 1993. And I'll show you that there's some issues related to that. We're not getting that full $26 million now. This is a map of Lake Jackson. The green area is the watershed. Many of you will recognize where you live with respect to that watershed or in that watershed. As Mike had pointed out in the introduction, it's about 6.5 square miles of lake in about a 43 square mile drainage area. It's a closed system in that there's no river coming in and out of this basin. There are some small streams, but they're all within the basin. So any water that falls in the watershed either evaporates or transpires, seeps into the ground, or runs into Lake Jackson. And that's an important issue in terms of the impacts of development or even land use within the watershed on the quality of the lake itself. Lake Jackson has been designated an outstanding Florida water back in the 1970s. And back then it was also designated as a Florida aquatic preserve. And just recently, about 3 years ago, we got our first manager for that aquatic preserve. That lady's gone on to work with the county, but a new manager has come in about 1.5 years ago. Her name is Caitlin Snyder. She's doing a wonderful job of raising the awareness of Lake Jackson in the public eye, hosting a variety of canoeing and paddling events or cleanups and lecture series. And so that's a coming feature of Lake Jackson, is to actually have the Florida Department of Environmental Protection actively managing to make it more useful and more obvious to the public at large. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how the lake itself functions in a very brief manner. One of the things that makes this lake and several others in this part of Florida very interesting is that the water levels change dramatically over periods that are generally measured in years or multiple years. And this is a graph of the water levels in Lake Jackson from January of 1950 through July of 2016. And you can see that there have been 3 major periods of drawdown two of which were quite abrupt. They came down to a minimum and they went back up again. The third one sort of lingered for almost from a little bit more than a decade, between about the year 2000 through 2000, the end of 2013. And it's only recently gotten back up into the sort of normal level, which is highlighted here by this yellow zone. So there are quite significant variations. What you're seeing on the left hand here is a scale in feet, ranging from a high here just above at about 96 feet to a low here of about 76 feet. So the lake's level can vary as much as 20 feet. And the average depth of the lake is only 10 feet. So there's a lot of land that either gets inundated or exposed as these water levels go up and down. But they're natural. They're not controlled by any dam or by any controlled flow of a river or uncontrolled flow of a river. There is no river really going in or out of Lake Jackson. Almost the entire control of the cycles that you see here are whether we have a rainy year or a period of several rainy years or not. And if we're not having a rainy year, then the evaporation exceeds precipitation and the lake level falls. There is also some leakage, but it's a minor amount of leakage by comparison. And so by and large, it's a simple balance between evaporation and precipitation that controls these different lake levels. Now, this is a map of Lake Jackson itself. It's a contour map, and it's a little bit hard to read. You can clearly make out the shoreline, which here is taken to be at 92 feet above sea level, above mean sea level. And the bottom of the lake is generally fairly flat, and it runs at about the 75, 76 foot contour. As you can see here, two sinkholes are known to exist in the bottom of the lake. The lime sink functioned during the 50s and the 60s, but it has since collapsed and closed up. The Porterhole sink, which is the one that my cursor's on now, off Fork Drive, is still open and leaking water down into the underlying aquifer at the rate of about 5 cubic feet per second. It's been measured. And there are probably maybe several other leaks in the bottom of the lake in old sinkholes which have partially collapsed but are still accepting water. So the impact here is that in terms of the water quality of the lake, it's important to maintain it, because the water that runs out of Porter Sink enters the groundwater of the Florida aquifer. Some of that groundwater becomes our drinking water. The wells for Tallahassee are lined up with a flow pattern in the aquifer after it passes under Lake Jackson. And recently, it was about 3 years ago, Sean McGlenn did a study by putting dye into the water and releasing it down Porter Hole. And sure enough, 34 days later, this showed up in Wakulla Springs, demonstrating a connection between the surface discharge or the surface discharges to Lake Jackson, ultimately coming up in Wakulla Springs. Okay, now to understand the lake, it's important to understand a cross section through the lake, and here's a cartoon of that. And there are a series of layers. The deepest layer is a limestone layer, shown here in blue, and it's sort of got very large caverns and very small caverns and even small vugs. So for all purposes, if you look at it, and many of you have seen these limestones where the outcrop south of town, they look like a sponge with a lot of vugs and holes in them. And in the case of the Florida aquifer under Lake Jackson, it's separated from the surface waters by a clay unit that's anywhere from 15 to about 30 feet thick. And that's a very, very tight clay that really prevents the water from moving into or out of the underlying Florida aquifer. And then perched above that are other aquifers which make up the land and the good portion of the bottom of the lake. And the lake sort of sits in all of this as a perched lake. And in fact, as shown in this diagram, the aquifer is not full. There's actually a unsaturated zone full of air under that clay layer, but above the water table in the main aquifer. And this is what that diagram looks like where there is a sinkhole, like the Porter sink that we're talking about. What's happened is that a cavern within the limestone collapsed. In turn, the clay layer was breached and it collapsed also, forming a passage between the surface water and into the groundwater. And as I say, that's something that's a semi-permanent feature of the lake, presently still operating. So it's not just a matter of maintaining and sustaining the quality of the water in the lake itself, but that does have an interaction with our drinking waters from the aquifer, and also for preserving the flow into and what is in the flow that goes to what we'll call the springs. Now, there are quite a number of agencies which have control over managing various aspects of the quality of the lake, not just the water quality, but the quality of the plants and animals in the lake, regulating the duck hunting, assuring public access, and making some of the facilities available, like the boat landings and the parks. And these are shown here as the federal agencies, the state agencies, and the local agencies. And one of the roles that the Friends of Lake Jackson plays is, one, to come to understand how these different management units work, and then two, try to coordinate the work between them along with the needs that we identify for the lake and its watershed, and to help either set public policy to sustain the lake or to undertake particular projects in support of this sustaining the lake. And those projects may be monitoring projects to be able to make scientific assessments of the water quality, or the plant community, or the fish community, or for that matter, the users community. Or it may very well be specific programs within the city and state and local county government that control the watershed. Lake Jackson has some of the most stringent stormwater quality requirements. There is a special lake protection zone set aside over much of the watershed to preserve Lake Jackson. And then in addition to those operations, then there are also specific projects undertaken by the state, the city, or the county to deal with things like stormwater runoff. And I'll illustrate a few of those as we close out here tonight. The water quality of the lake is generally good. It meets Class 3 waters. It's swimmable, fishable. We've had chronic issues with nitrogen, phosphorus, and their effect on dissolved oxygen, so we get low dissolved oxygen. These have been off-again, on-again issues, and just recently, these waters of Lake Jackson have been delisted from the state list of impaired waters, because the routine monitoring of the lake on a quarterly basis by FDEP, along with the county and the city, have given indications that the lake waters are now meeting these numeric criteria for total nitrogen and total phosphorus. But it's a very, very close thing. And in fact, the lake itself is a little bit more complicated than the regulations allow. The northern half of the lake tends to be a much cleaner water body than the southern half of the lake. And if you were to partition that, and then the total nitrogen and total phosphorus in the southern part of the lake are often still above state standards. So that's one of the issues that we're in constant discussion with both the county, the city, and the state agencies. And this has shown up as harmful algae blooms, just like they report in South Florida, right here in Lake Jackson. And there have been some recently. They've been documented, measured, and as you can imagine, they're quite a concern because we have quite a bit of fishing. Some of it is assistance fishing here in Lake Jackson. So let me tell you a little bit about what is being done to control some of the water quality issues. The big sources for stormwater pollution to the lake, and also excess nitrogen and phosphorus from leaking septic systems, is through McGinnis Arm, here, the arm of the lake that pokes down to the south and almost gets to I-10, and Ford's Arm, which is the arm of the lake that extends to the east. And you can see both of these discharge into the southern part of the lake, which is a little bit restricted in terms of its exchange with the other portions of the lake, and tend to be which tends to be a reason why the lake water quality there is distinctly different. Now, over the years, there have been a number of very important controls on stormwater and projects to control stormwater, or the effects of stormwater nutrients getting into the lake. And they go back to some of the land use requirements that were developed back in the 1970s, and special stormwater requirements that the city put into place. More recently, since the 1980s, a major stormwater treatment facility was built at the south end of McGinnis Arm. And actually, you see it as you drive on I-10. The facility it consists of ponds with a very distinct dam or weir that you can see from I-10 just south of the road. And then the water that comes out of that stormwater retention pond passes under under I-10 and into some constructed wetlands before it enters into the lake. And some issues related to that. There have been a number of other smaller stormwater ponds constructed around the watershed during the 1990s. The big event was in 1999 and 2000 when more than 10 million tons of muck and sediment, 2 million cubic yards of muck and sediment were removed from the bottom of Lake Jackson, because Lake Jackson had pretty much gone dry during that dry down. And I'll show you with some of the pictures of the heavy equipment out of the bottom of the lake that was used to remove that huge volume of muck. Since then, other stormwater facilities have been built at Boom Road and at Okahiki, which is located on McGinnis Arm. And right now, there are other projects underway that you'll probably be interested in. There's a new stormwater facility being developed in the Market District near Thomasville Road. There's another project that involves largely drainage revisions, but also some water quality aspects. And you can see this as you pass along Meridian Road. And then there are now some ongoing measurement programs and engineering studies to look at discharges into the southern end of the lake, with the idea of improving those in the future. So we'll close out by talking a little bit about those. This is a photograph taken in the southeast corner of the lake, sort of here near, not far from Crowder Road, looking to the northwest. and you can see that the lake bottom is completely dried out here. It actually, what happened was that they would get the water level down to just a few inches and then pump the water out to another sub-basin somewhere else in the lake so they could operate the heavy equipment like this on the bottom of the lake. In the lower right here, you see what happens when there's a cave-in of one of these sinks, and they almost lost this backhoe. But they didn't. They managed to get it out. It's just a dramatic picture. The effect of this is now the lake is refilled since then, and it has had a very, very beneficial effect both on the water quality of the lake, but also on the fisheries. The brim fisheries have come back very, very well, and the fishing in Lake Jackson is quite good now. Let's see. This is two illustrations of the southern end of the lake. I'll go to the right one first. And what you're seeing is the very southern tip of Lake Jackson and then McGinnis Arm extending down to almost I-10, which you can see in the bottom of that figure. And you see that same thing in the left-hand panel as well. It's a little bit harder to distinguish McGinnis Arm. It's this dark water body there, but it's a little easier to make out the stormwater facility here south of I-10. And that has a settling basin, and then this rectangular area is a sand filter. So the water that runs into that basin must pass through this sand filter before it exits under the weir, under I-10, and then flows out into constructed wetlands at the south end of McGinnis Arm. The significant thing here is that the Northwest Florida Water Management District built this back in the 1970s and early 80s. It's never really been verified as to how well it's working, and it hasn't been maintained quite as well as it should be. So the city of Tallahassee is now taking on the responsibility of doing a stormwater study wherein they will be measuring the nutrients coming into the settling pond, the nutrients as they flow between the settling pond and the constructed wetland, and the nutrients that are entering into McGinnis Arm, to understand in a quantitative sense how much is being removed by this facility, both during heavy rains and storms. They'll do 7 different storms, and during baseline conditions in between storms. And if, as some of us suspect, it will show that right now the efficiency of removal is nowhere near as good as what it was designed to do, then the Water Management District and the city are prepared to look at what would be necessary to upgrade that facility. Other projects that are underway are in the eastern side of the southern part of the lake, off the area known as Ford's Arm. And that's shown here in the very, very upper left-hand corner here, a portion of Ford's Arm. You can see I-10 coming across here. You can see Thomasville Road on the right-hand side here. And this is the drainage area that goes into Ford's Arm. And there are 2 major projects underway, one of which is a $4.5 million retrofit to improve the water flow under Meridian Road and do away with a lot of the chronic flooding problem they've had there, but also to reduce some of the sedimentation and nutrient flow by putting in sediment retention basins, both above and below these box culverts under Meridian Road, and various drainage improvements along a number of the smaller streams that are tributaries into Ford's Arm. Another project that the city is undertaking is a retrofit of the stormwater pond and very casual facilities in the Market Square district. This is right next to the Premier Gym, for those of you who are familiar with it. And the idea is to make, I'll show you what the idea is to make this into a multi-use stormwater park area. This is a map of that area. You see here, Thomasville Road, Timberlane Road would pass just along the south, just off of this map. And this is the primary gym would be under this green banner that says McClay Road. So it's this whole area in here. And what they're doing is they have a plan to improve the size and capacity of some of the retention ponds in this area, and then to landscape it all over into a very attractive park. This isn't the actual plan. This, I think, is from Cascade Park, but it's an illustration of the kind of landscaping they're planning for this multi-use stormwater facility that will also reduce some of the input of nutrients to Lake Jackson. So keeping up with all of this, encouraging things to go along, helping to find funding sources are the activities of the Friends of Lake Jackson. I hope you've enjoyed this introduction, and if you can, just like Mike was saying, we'd like you to come and join us. If you go to the website, which is the Friends of Lake Jackson .org, you can find a way to sign up and even pay your $20 dues with a credit card. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. Really appreciate the presentation tonight, folks. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat there on Facebook. I'll read them off as they come in. Alan, I want to start off by asking you, how did you get involved with Friends of Lake Jackson?
It's an interesting story because I was a graduate student at Florida State University in the geology and oceanography program back in the 1960s. And back then, Lake Jackson was not heavily vegetated. It was open. The water level was fairly high. It was a very nice sailing lake. So my first date with the woman who was to become my wife was in a sailboat on Lake Jackson back in 1968. And so I've had kind of an affiliation now. After we got married, we moved to Massachusetts and then to Texas and then back here to Florida, and we built a house on the eastern shore of Lake Jackson. And so I've had a real going relation. And back in 1998, there was a group of us that decided to set up the Friends of Lake Jackson to accomplish some of the things that we've accomplished over the last 20 years.
So, one of the things that I've always heard about Lake Jackson is that it has fully drained before. And so I know you showed a couple of photos of that. How often does that occur? And what kind of impact does it have on the overall lake?
The drawdowns?
Where it drains completely dry.
There used to be a legend that you could set your clock by it because it occurred every 20 years. Well, it turns out it's not quite that regular. But there is a tendency for something like a 20-year cycle to occur. The lake doesn't go entirely dry, but what it does is it breaks up into a series of little ponds and puddles. And as you see in that one case where back in 1999 and 2000, they were able to get very heavy mining equipment out onto the lake and remove that tremendous volume of muck. So where those drawdowns occur and when we're prepared for them to take advantage of kind of a natural opportunity to clean out the lake, they're much to our advantage. And that's probably a good reason why the natural cycles of the lake should be preserved.
So not seeing any questions or comments over here on the right. Thank you all to everyone who has. Oh, one. Will the improvements at the area near Timberlane have a positive effect on algae growth in the lake? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, it will. The only way that we can actually get at the algae growth in the lake, and particularly the harmful algae blooms, is to reduce the nutrient inputs into the lake. And it's a problem throughout Florida, and for that matter, throughout most of the country. It's unfortunate that we share this problem with those other water bodies because the harmful algae blooms that can occur can actually cause mortality. And so controlling that is important. And every increment in reducing those nutrients is to the good. So the facility there in the Market District is a little bit remote from the lake. It's at the other end of the drainage. But it will have some beneficial effect. And I think they haven't really completed the engineering estimate of just how many pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus are involved in that. But they feel it's enough to justify expending that money on constructing that facility.
Well, Alan, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to us this evening. Your website there, friendsoflakejackson.org, for all who are interested in learning more about Friends of Lake Jackson, possibly joining and getting in contact with Alan or with your organization. This is Sustainable Tallahassee's last Green Drinks of the year of 2020. We will be back with you, I say hopefully in person, but probably on Zoom or Facebook Live here, rather, in January. And I will leave you all this evening with, if you have not yet, please remember to vote. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.